to the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation to give up 3 of their 6 channels. So many things have happened since the directive was issued. Some political parties have reacted, some civil society organizations have reacted, and so on. And we are going to attempt to bring some clarity to the issue today. And we are most privileged to have the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa with us. This is a young man that I've met a couple of times, and I've been highly impressed by his devotion to duty, his capacity to analyze the issues in the media, and his objectivity. And I'm so happy that the producers of this show managed to get him into the studios of Pan-African Television. We are going to follow a normal format. He's going to be discussing this issue and related issues for about 20, maximum 25 minutes. And thereafter, we are going to come to the studio and take comments and questions from the studio audience. And then we'll move on to our Facebook platform and our YouTube platform and other platforms and so on, and take comments and questions from there. And then we'll come back to our guests to respond to those questions and comments. It is indeed my special privilege to welcome to the microphone my friend, my highly respected friend, Sulemana Braimah, Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa.
Good evening, colleagues, and I must say that it's an honor to be here. When I received a call from one of our colleagues in the media, and the mission was to tell me about this program and whether or not I'm going to be available for it, I said, well, this perhaps is one particular thing that even if I had other schedules, I would be prepared and willing to cancel to be able to be here. And of course, I must also say thank you very much to Uncle Kwesi for the commendation. We look up to people like them and the sacrifices they've made for our democracy to continue the work that we do. I remember asking him some time ago last year, what was the inspiration for all the sacrifices they were doing, some of which landed them in jail and so on. And I was quite baffled by the response, which was that, well, we did not even have time to think about what we wanted to achieve for ourselves. It was about sacrificing to build a nation that we would all be proud of. And so the least we can do as young people would be not to disappoint them, but to continue the crusade for, helping to develop our nation so that when our children become like us, they wouldn't be going through some of the things that we are going through. So thank you very much, Ankwesi, for the invitation, and congratulations for leading this effort. So I was invited to talk about media freedom, but particularly in relation to what Mr. Pratt talked about in terms of the conversation ongoing, the debate ongoing about the directive to GBC to cede 3 of its channels currently broadcasting on the DTT platform in Ghana, the digital terrestrial television platform that we have in the country, which of course is a state-owned facility and not owned by an individual or owned by a ministry. So just perhaps to reiterate, maybe to start with, what is the issue? And I believe it is something that you are all familiar with at this stage, and Mr. Pratt mentioned it. So we are confronted with a directive from the Minister for Communications to the state broadcaster, and that directive says it must be complied within 60 days. The directive is that 3 of the 6 channels that GBC is currently broadcasting on is to be given up on the DTT platform. Now, I think talking about media freedom, it is important to make the point that we should not always limit our minds to the usual reports that we see. One journalist beaten, journalist camera seized, police arrest a journalist, like what has been happening. The modern Ghana incident where national security operatives storm a media house, pick them, and so on and so forth. That's important and that's critical, and that really constitutes a violation of media freedom. But the other side that often, eludes us, that if you are not observant, you may not track, is the regulatory and policy violations that occur. In fact, I should say the regulatory and policy-led violation or inspired violations. And I often say that when we talk about countries that are quite abusive, repressive, and when it comes to media freedom are so bad, it is not the case that governments there decide to say that, look, we are not using the law. It is the same law that they will use. So when we used to complain about Yahya Jammeh and the abuses against journalists, it wasn't that he would just get up and say, because I'm the president, I will arrest this person or I will intimidate that person. They will interpret the law and use the law to do what they want to do. And so that is what we have been observing over the past few years here in Ghana. And the GBC incident that we are talking about perhaps highlights it further. So why are we agitated as Media Foundation and other people who defend media freedom? The question is, why is it an issue? GBC is broadcasting 6 channels. Pan-African Television perhaps is broadcasting on 1 channel. So if they are saying give up 3 and broadcast on 3, why should it be a problem? And indeed, I was on a TV program on the phone being interviewed, and the other side was the deputy chairman of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Communications. And he makes the point or the argument that why, growing up, we had GTV, which was just 1 channel. Is it that they couldn't perform their public service function? And today we are talking about 6 and reducing it to 3 is an issue. Well, my rebuttal was, well, when we were also growing up, we had a government that had, 50 ministers, a parliament of 200 MPs. And today we have a government that is over 100 ministers, a parliament of over 270 MPs. Is it because the governments that had less than 50 ministers couldn't perform their function? Now, GBC is a state broadcaster. And the fact that it is broadcasting on multiple channels is not unique to GBC. You can look at the Kenyan television. You look at SABC in South Africa. You can look at the BBC. These are public service broadcast entities. And as you and I know, the 6 channels on GBC are active broadcast channels. They are not channels that GBC is keeping and saying that we are thinking of what to do with it. So you can talk about GTV, which is the news. They have GTV News. They have Obonu, brought 7, the Ga and the Dangbe community. They have GTV Sports Plus, which is a dedicated sports platform, which is the channel that is mostly used to bid for international sporting rights that enables Ghanaians to have access to these sports competitions to watch and so on and so forth. So if you say they should, seed 3 of them on the DTT platform, which one should go? Now, the minister gives 2 reasons why this action is being taken and why it must be complied. Reason number 1 is that the current DTT platform is a 40-channel platform. It's able to take 40 channels. And that the platform is full to capacity. And they've realized that, or the best practice is to have redundancy on the platform, which means that there must be certain channels that are fallow on the platform to enable the platform function well. The second reason is that because the platform is full, if the president needs an emergency channel to broadcast to the people of this country, there wouldn't be such emergency channel. And also, if national security happens to need a channel, there wouldn't be such a channel. These are the two reasons given by the minister. So first, let us interrogate the reasons given. The channel is full. I guess the immediate question to ask is, who filled it up? And as it was being filled, was it not known that redundancy is required? I looked at the NCA website and the database that they have in terms of authorizations, and they publish this either on quarterly or sometimes half-yearly. And you would notice that as recently as 23rd April 2020, an authorization was issued to Wuntumi Television in Kumasi. So assuming that was the 40th channel that was issued, was it not known that redundancy is required on the platform? So certainly that argument is untenable. The second reason given is that because the platform is full, if the president needs a channel to do an emergency broadcast, there was none. The point is, that is the mandate that GBC has always served. I don't think there has been any occasion where the president of the republic would say, I am looking for a channel to broadcast to the nation, and there is none. In any case, since this pandemic, COVID-19, the president has addressed the nation more than perhaps 10 times. Which channel has he been using to address the nation? Is it some foreign channel that is, conjured to broadcast to the nation? And indeed, the licensing conditions, when frequencies are being allocated, is that in a true state of emergency, the president has powers to commandeer all channels that have been given for purposes of serving the nation. So if there should be a national disaster that requires that the government communicates with the people, no FM station can resist and say, look, I'm a private broadcaster and I wouldn't give off my frequency for the president or for national security purposes. So again, that argument is untenable. If you look at it from this perspective, then the question is, what then could be the reasons behind the idea that channels should be given off? And then later, in order to try and balance the equation, they say, look, it's not only GBC. We had also written to another private operator who has 3 channels, and we've told them that we are taking we are taking 2 out of the platform. I think that that's a private entity. We can have a debate about that. I have seen a response from that entity, which I don't know how they are going to respond to. But let's even assume that the minister's reasons were tenable. Let's assume they are not, but let's just assume that they are tenable. They are rational. They make sense, and so on. The question to ask is, under what locus is the Minister for Communication writing to the state broadcaster, not just a letter, but a letter which is a directive that must be complied within 60 days? We all know that the framers of our constitution perhaps anticipated governmental interferences and excessive use of power this way, and created the National Media Commission. And it is clear that as far as the state media are concerned, Graphic, Times, GBC, GNA, and if there is any other I've forgotten, they are completely under the management and control of the National Media Commission. And Ankwesi here has been a member of the commission before. And that is why the National Media Commission is the entity that appoints the governing board, even though the Constitution says in consultation with the President. But of course, it is the Commission that appoints the governing board of these state institutions, state broadcasters, including GBC for that matter. The rest of it, whether it is Forestry Commission, or Tema Oil Refinery, or BOST, and so on, the President appoints directly, or the NCA, the regulator, the President appoints directly. It is the reason why the NMC is the body that appoints the Director General, even though by Constitution it says once the board is constituted, the board can then appoint the Chief Executive or the Director General. But surprisingly, the directive from the minister does not even copy the National Media Commission. It copies the Ministry of Information, perhaps assuming that the NMC is an appendage of the ministry, I don't know. And then it copies an independent consultant that is supposed to be advising the minister on our DTT process. Meanwhile, this same ministry has crafted the National Dtt Policy that was released just this year, which is a government policy. And in that policy, it makes it clear that the national media, the NCA, which is the regulator and the one that allots frequencies, is supposed or required to constantly work in consultation with the National Media Commission to ensure that broadcast standards and so on, are upheld. But we have a situation where a directive is given to GBC to give off, channels that are on air. And therefore, the argument I make is, it is not just channels. We are talking about content. Because if GBC were to comply and say, okay, we are giving off Obonu, the channel that runs Obonu, which is a regional channel, what it means is that whatever content that Obonu TV is currently producing for the Ga Dangbe community will be off. If it is the learning channel, which is now deployed to support our kids during this pandemic, that GBC says, okay, that is the channel we are giving out, what it means is that the content that is being broadcast on that channel goes away. If it is GTV News, which I am sure if they give the government the opportunity, they will say, no, don't touch that one, because that is the one that brings live coverage of events involving the president and parliament to the people. If that channel is the one that is to go, certainly it's about content. And so to what extent does a minister direct the state broadcaster? Not even the information minister that has GBC as one of his agencies can do that. Constitutionally, it cannot be possible. Now, then the argument the minister makes is, well, NMC cannot help you. Why? Because NMC does not manage the DTT platform. First of all, the National Dtt Policy talks about the setting up of the Central Digital Transmission Company Limited, which in itself has an issue. And it is to be set up as a government-owned, executive-controlled entity. And I say so because the CEO is to be appointed by the president, and the board members are supposed to be appointed by the president. And it will be the single manager of the DTT platform. Of course, it says that the membership of the board shall include GIBA, shall include the National Media Commission, a private person who has expertise in infrastructure management, and so on and so forth. So to that extent, you can say, okay, there is some stakeholder involvement. The question is, why is it not that company that is giving the directive? How has the minister suddenly become the manager of the DTT platform? If we were to accept that because she is the communications minister and in charge of the digital infrastructure, that ministry is in charge of digital infrastructure and the management of our DTT process and so on and so forth, and therefore they can write to GBC to say, we don't want this channel, we want that channel. The next thing that will happen is that GBC has vast lands in Accra and so many places. the Minister of Lands will write to GBC and say, since we are the managers of government lands, government needs lands. And so we ask you to cede these lands because we want to use it for something. And in fact, maybe the Minister for Works and Housing would be the next to say, well, we need some bungalows for government government officials or for other purposes. And since the ministry is the manager of government estates, we want you to cede that. You know? So it's just something that should not happen. And as I said, NMC is not even copied, completely disregarded, even though that is the body that appoints the governing board and so on and so forth. The other thing to look at is, but what is even the DTT platform? And who has made it possible? The DTT platform runs from 42 sites. Of these 42, 38 of them are GBC-owned sites. 42. 38 of them are based at, they are using GBC infrastructure, and the lands are owned by GBC. And in fact, the head end, you know, the final connection to the DTT platform, sitting around the Flagstaff House, or Jubilee House now, it's a GBC infrastructure. So the entity that is making the whole infrastructure possible, if you decide that you need channels, and you decided to fill it up all the way till just some 2-3 months ago, why should it be that entity that should suffer? And in fact, from 2010, when this whole DTT process was being conceptualized, the framers envisaged GBC being one of the managers of the DTT platform. At that time, they were talking about PPP, private public partnership. So GBC and the independent broadcasters being the other. And for some reasons, it has now become a new company has to be established, owned by the government, controlled by the executive. One of the best case scenarios, Kenya, they were able to complete their DTT switch off, the analog switch off in 2015 as required by the Geneva Convention. Tanzania was able to do it. If you go to Kenya today, it is both the public broadcaster and a private company that they've put together to manage the platform. The other point they raise is that, oh, GBC is broke. There is no money. How can they be running 6 channels instead of 3 channels when the managers themselves have not complained that they cannot run? But the question to ask is, who has made GBC broke? If you do a technical analysis, and I've spoken to technical people, those 38 sites owned by GBC and the infrastructure that the DTT platform is currently running on, if GBC were to rent that to, if the DTT platform was a private something, GBC would be making in excess of $10 million a year. And we know what it costs to bring live programming, even from the studios, not to talk about outside broadcast, which GBC is compelled a lot of the times to do. Because the president is going to this place to commission that, and there's fanfare, there's commissioning of the ambulances, there's commissioning of that, parliamentary committee, accounts committee is sitting, there must be live coverage, the vetting committee or appointment committee is sitting and there must be live coverage, and so on and so forth. And GTV is the one that does that. And nobody pays for it. So if we say GBC is broke, who is making it broke? The other point they talk about is, oh, if we take them from the DTT platform, they can broadcast on T1. They call something T1. So if you are not familiar with the issues, they say, but if they say you have another platform that you can broadcast on, then what is the problem? The problem is the T1 is an experimental digital broadcast platform that GBC itself in 2010 decided to roll out in Accra and Kumasi. So if you say GBC can broadcast on T1, what you are saying is that GBC should cover Accra and Kumasi. Technically, T1 is fit for commercial people who would want to say operate in just Accra or in Kumasi for the commercial viability and so on and so forth. But how do you compel a national broadcaster to now broadcast on a platform that can only cover Accra and Kumasi? And these are arguments that have been made by people to say, look, it is not the case that we are saying GTV must shut down the channels, but all that we are saying is that there are other facilities they can decide to broadcast using satellite or broadcast on T1. And the same people who are saying GTV can broadcast on satellites are the same people who say GTV is broke or GBC is broke. And it costs to broadcast on satellite. So these have been the arguments that have been around the issue. And whether you look at it from whether the minister has a mandate, or you look at it from whether it must be NMC that is doing it, or you look at it from why a state broadcaster must shut down certain channels, because like I said, if you go to SABC, you would find SABC 1, SABC 2, SABC 3, and there's SABC News, and 2 or 3 more other channels. If you go to Kenya, it is the same. If you go to Zimbabwe, the state broadcaster there is not broadcasting on only one channel. There is a reason why the BBC is not broadcasting on just a single channel. If you raise the BBC, they will say, well, BBC, they have the money to do it. But who funds them? You know? And talking about funding, we all know about GBC TV license fee. That became a very debatable issue not too long ago when the then Director General decided to get a legal backing for it to be enforced. Well, he was kicked out for that same reason. And I guess the assumption was that people should have free access to television. And the condition for payment perhaps would make any government, sitting government, unpopular. But within this same framework, we are now being told free-to-air content television broadcasters like Pan-African TV, once the DTT process is complete and the Central Digital Transmission Company Limited is set up, there's now going to be what we call, they call it what? Digital access fee. Not to be collected by GBC anymore, but by this company, as I mentioned, state-owned, executive-controlled. And they would now use that to support GBC's operations. And I have not heard anything like this before. If it is a private entity that is collecting fees to finance the state broadcaster, it must be a private entity commissioned by the state broadcaster to say, okay, we commission you to do TV license collection for us, or digital access fee, or whatever it is for us. And what that means is that once it is rolled on, if you don't pay that, the Central Digital Transmission Company Limited is supposed to scramble your network. So at home, then you can't watch television. But see, the big question around that is that who then now becomes the person or the entity that determines whether I receive TV content or I don't? And it is this entity that is going to be executive controlled. And you perhaps can imagine the implications. A National Media Commission, all they do is to have one representative on the board, just as they have at NCA. And I doubt the NMC, just by one representative on the NCA board, is able to influence what happens at the NCA. When you make the argument that it is this Central Digital Transmission Company Limited that is going to be the one determining whether Pan-African TV content reaches Tamale or not, they say no. The channel operator or the transmission channel, the company, all it will do is make sure that your content comes through and it passes on. So almost like, let me say, garbage in, garbage out. That is their job. Then you ask the question, so if I receive content on my screen and it is defamatory against me, who do I sue? Is it the producer of the content or the company that made it possible for me to receive that content? And again, I've talked about the digital access fee and the fact that it is a central digital transmission company that is going to do it. So how can we be sure? If this program we are doing, somebody at that transmission company is not happy about it and decides that, well, we know they have a lot of viewers in Tamale and therefore we do whatever we will do. And they end up saying, oh, we had a technical issue. What do we do? So it's an issue that we cannot just say, keep quiet to it and allow it to go. Because invariably what is going to happen is that if you take off the Obonu channel, the producers and the cameramen and all those people who are serving that channel are going to be off. Same with the other channels. They have to be off. And then eventually the complaint will continue. Oh, even 3 Accra, they are not able to manage it. So let's reduce it to 1 because they are poor and they are this and they are that. And eventually what will happen is that, oh, do we even need GTV? The government is spending so much on this station. The private sector is doing better. And so let us perhaps divest it and be sure that government is off this, and so on and so forth. So these are the critical issues within the space, and particularly in relation to the state broadcaster. And that is why some of us think that, no, this is not something that we should be quiet about and just think that, oh, 6 channels, they say give 3, and it's okay. As I've said, there's a private broadcaster who has also been written to with the same directives. A broadcaster that has been operating for the last 25 years and operating, 3 channels. Then you say within 60 days they must shut down these channels because you are taking over the DTT. But the most curious thing is that the same DTT policy says all existing free-to-air analog broadcasters are supposed to be enrolled on the DTT platform. So if you are a free-to-air television station under the current circumstances, and then they say, well, we are not allowing you to be on the DTT platform, in practice what they are saying is that we are shutting you down. Because there's where are you going to broadcast? Analog is not allowed. And therefore you must be on the DTT platform. So if they say we are taking 2 of your channels, what it means is that they are saying that they are shutting your operations for those 2 channels. And unlike elsewhere, where others are allowed to build similar platforms, in Ghana, it's a single DTT platform owned by the government. And all free-to-air analog broadcasters must be on it. So if you're a free-to-air broadcaster like Pan-Africa Television and then they say, okay, we are taking you off the DTT platform, you can explore other platforms to broadcast, then maybe you convert yourself into a pay TV, in which case you can decide to be on the facilities that the pay television broadcasters are using. So I think that Ghanaians need to understand, the basics of it. I am not an engineer, and if you speak to the engineers, they may even give you scarier analysis. So if GTB or GBC has been broadcasting these channels since the inception of the DTT platform, why would you just get up and say within 60 days, shut down? They may have contracts with advertisers which are like a year. So when they shut it down, who takes care of whatever the contractual breaches that happens? So our view is that is a ministerial overreach. The minister does not have the locus to direct GBC on what to do. National Media Commission has not said so. And of course, the channels are broadcasting channels, 24/7 channels. And to say that shut them, I don't think that the president will even have the power to say that within 60 days, this is what I am doing. And that is why some of us have been up in arms against this what we call inimical and illegal directive. And just yesterday we petitioned the National Media Commission, and we are hoping that they will live up to the bill. They will live up to the constitutional obligations that they have. We look forward to it, but if the NMC should also eventually say, well, we cannot stand in the way of the minister, then as I said, perhaps the next thing we would hear would be that the Minister for Lands wants some part of GBC lands for government use, and Minister for this wants GBC that for this other use. And so these are the issues at stake, and I would end here. I believe that the questions and discussion sessions may enable us to even delve into the issues more comprehensively. Thank you very much.
Well, comrades, we heard it all. I've learned quite a bit from the introductory remarks, as it were. Now we are coming into the studio, and because we are racing against time, I like to advise that nobody speaks for more than 2 minutes. So for those of you in the studio who would like to raise questions or to ask questions or to make comments, please show by hand. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. So we're going to start with you, and then we go to her, and then we come to him, and then we come to another him. And then we'll start taking comments from our viewers on WhatsApp, Facebook, and the other platforms. So we start.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. It's been an insightful topic, and the lead discussant has really unveiled most of the issues that we need to talk about. But for me, I think that the current dispensation or the current regime always have 2 reasons for whatever decision they take. It seems to me that they are influenced by power or politics, and then economics. This station or this DTT that they want to call off from GBC, I think they are going to privatize it. And I won't go far, but you will know from the scheme of things that it is going to go into the family or the close associates of the current president. The clansmen of the president are the people who are going to benefit from these 3 DTT platforms. Because recently we heard that, or we've come to know that there is a new radio station that is battling with waves between Joy FM and their radio station, and it's creating a lot of mess. If you look at what they are doing, they recently had an issue with some radio stations. They closed the radio stations. They moved to telecommunication networks. You can check the news. You realize that they are having issues with MTN currently as of now, because they think that they should also decrease their scope to some extent for them to operate. I don't know what it is about, but I can sit down and think through it and feel that it is about the impending elections and how it can be declared, because all this sudden need for a platform for the president to communicate to the general public in a matter of urgency, I don't know where it is coming from. The lead discussant has already said that the president has always used the GCB platform to make any announcement that they want, and they are not even charged for it. So if all of a sudden, within about 2 to 3 months, knowing Anochi in the background, the scheme with how they are going to control social media and all these things, one can only think that it is to support their agenda for the declaration of the 2020 result. And just this evening, I chanced on something on Facebook, something that has to do with selling of one of our assets, and even they are selling it to another company called Asase Investment or something like that. It's like now Asase of Fonaba. the landowners have come and they are trying to find ways to take properties. I think we shouldn't encourage this. As young as we are, let's show the advocacy on social media and let's support the work of the Media Foundation for West Africa. Thank you.
And please, my question is, if the organization turned down, is it not going to affect the workers over there? That's my question.
Mr. Braimah, I salute you. Yes, my concern, I have some few concerns. With the DDT platform, the digital platform, is it that the space is always limited to only 40? Can it be expanded? So what is the issue? I really want to understand that. The second one is that if you talk about content, the National Media Commission, I think it is their role to ensure that the stations on the platform abide to some standards. So I want to know, is it that the National Media Commission are sleeping on their job? Because if you are strictly to go to with content, it means that some of the stations already on the platform cannot even stand it. It means that there are so many stations we have. We have about 30 something. You said 40. So what it means is that when you go to content, you just be flipping your channels. You see that some of them, as in content, they don't really have any content. So I don't know whether the NMC does some appraisal of content within intervals to know that, okay, this TV station, the contents they are showing over the years are not up to standard. So we can take this space from them. So I want to know whether there have been some kind of content appraisal over the years. And lastly, I also want to understand if the National Media Commission decides to decline or decides not to take the directive from the minister, what happens? Are they justified to go to court? I want to know the legal, understanding of the whole issue. No, they decide to decline. That, okay, GBC, they write to GBC and say, GBC, do not adhere to what the ministry has said. What happens? I want to understand what happens, yes.
I mean, we've all seen what has happened. So some of us are not the least bit surprised when this is coming up. It is obvious that they want to make GTV or GBC not look too good enough so that they can privatize it. They've always done it. It started from the days of the IUP, where they came into government, where, how do you call it? You had government doing very well in most of the sectors as far as putting up commercial whatever was concerned. They shut it down. They shut almost 300 or so companies, state companies, privatized them, found a way to privatize. It's the same thing they are trying to do. So we are not surprised, and I just want to add my voice to encourage you to, and your organization on what you're doing, and call out on all other young men out there to do our best to come out and then stop this. Thank you very much.
Well, comrades, we are racing against time, and because of that, we are not going to be able to read all the messages that we are getting, and we're just going to read a few. This one from a lady called Miss Ashi, and she says, why does Ubinim and Ubo have 3 channels each? This one is also from a lady, and she wants to know, she says that the Ministry of Communications must come again on this issue. We have George from Takoradi, and oh my goodness, I think somebody has just tried to call and messed up all the messages. Oh my goodness. This is from George. No. This is from Kofi D from Kaswa. And Kofi D's solution is very simple. He says, please, the only solution is to vote them out come December 7th. That's Kofi D. George from Takoradi says that Pan-African television is simply the best. And I think that we leave the messages here because we don't have enough time, so that we can give our host, our guest, clear 15 minutes to respond to the questions and to make any other comments that we like to make. This means that we're extending the program by 5 minutes. So, Masa.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, just to make the point that within international broadcast standards, there's basically 3 divisions: the public service, the private sector, commercial, and community broadcasts. So we are talking about a situation where the public service broadcaster is operating 6 channels, and if you were to take the point that is made that the platform is completely full and it is a 40-channel platform, what it means is that we have 34 channels in the hands of the private sector. And I think that this is really, perhaps one would say, tilted towards the private sector. But of course, 6 channels may not be bad, but if we are in a situation where they say even that, give off 3, then we now have 3 is to 37. That certainly is something that is terrible. So there was a question on what happens if the National Media Commission revokes the directive from the minister. I think when that happens, what it means is that the commission has just done its work. There was a time, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was under President Mills. There was an attempt to dismiss the then editor of the Daily Graphic by, an action by the Ministry of Information, which has the Daily Graphic or these state broadcasters under it as agencies. And so you say, well, yeah, the minister has supervisory role over these agencies. But when the attempt was made, the NMC stepped in and made it clear that it is not the job of a minister to decide who becomes the editor or the CEO or board members of any of the state media organizations. And so on this occasion, perhaps it's even more grievous when there's a directive for the state broadcaster to shut down 3 of its channels. The NMC would have just basically done what it has to do. I think what the NMC basically has to do is just to open the Constitution to Chapter 12 and the relevant provisions there and say, Madam Minister, please look at this. Unfortunately, you are a lawyer. See whether you have the mandate to do what you want to do, in terms of giving directives to the state broadcaster to take an action that would affect content. Because, as I said, it is not that GBC has the channel and it is lying there. They say, well, we will use it in 2021, or we will deploy it for Dagbani service or Gonja service in 2022. And then you say, well, we are taking it and then we would revert it back to you at some point. So it's a matter that certainly has implications for content, and that is untenable. And the minister, I don't recall whether in the letter or in subsequent statements has said, look, when the platform is expanded, there will be additional channels and we would reallocate additional channels to you. In fact, it's in the letter, the directive. And the question is, if they don't need 6 now, and therefore that is why you are taking 3, why would they need additional channels in the future? So that when there are more channels, you would then reallocate to them. if your argument is that the 6 is too much, so we are taking 3, and then in the same vein you say, well, there will be more channels later when it becomes available, we would give it to you. You ask yourself, if they don't need it now, why would they need it in the future? So there was a question whether the platform can be expanded. You see, one of the curious things has been why Ghana hasn't still done the digital switch over. If you read the literature behind it, it started in 2010. A National Digital Broadcast Technical Committee was constituted, and they did an amazing work. If you look at the report that was submitted to government at the time, you know, including the timelines for switchover, you know, the campaigns that have to be done, the public education, the logos that have to be used, and so on and so forth. And it was in that document that they proposed the PPP, ownership of the transmission company, and so on and so forth. In that document, the digital switchover was supposed to have happened in 2014. We are talking about 2020 now, and it hasn't happened. Why? When other countries, Senegal, Kenya, Tanzania, they've done it. And when Kenya did it, they moved from, I think, around just about 20 channels that was available then to close to 100 channels. So the question is, what is keeping us from the digital switch over? In February or so, the minister had said we'll switch over in June. The last time she was asked, she says because of coronavirus, you know, and the implications on the global market chains for digital stuff and so on and so forth. Certainly, I am not convinced that with the way things are going, we could have done it. And remember, because of the way the process is even going, that is why a number of times the broadcasters have had to go to court. And if people who are managing the process were minded, the ITU has put out a document sharing experiences from other countries that have implemented the digital switchover. And one of the critical things that they put out is that the process must be consultative, must be inclusive, and must be participatory. And that when Kenya started, those things were not in line, and the committee that was taxed suffered multiple suits, which delayed the process. And even that, they were still able to meet the timeline. But we are in a country where, at one point, GIBA representatives were driven out from a meeting that was supposed to be about this digital migration process. We are talking about an association that has close to 200 and something, over 200 broadcasters. And they were driven out of a meeting. So if this is the approach, how do we envisage that we would have the digital switchover done? And as I said, we don't know when it is going to be done, but certainly if it were to be done, we wouldn't be here fighting over channels. I think that there will be more channels than perhaps people can even take to do the broadcast. So certainly the expansion can happen, and the minister says it, that once we expand, we will give you more channels back. You know, and the question is, why has it not been done? And indeed, it certainly can be expanded. The other point is whether NMC is monitoring content of television stations. Indeed, there are TV stations that when you switch on, maybe from morning to evening is all about the word of God. You know, preaching and here, and then concoctions, and who can do money for juju and lotto numbers, you know, and so on and so forth. All those channels are there, you know, and nobody is touching them, but they want to go for the channels of the state broadcaster that is doing public service, broadcasting in the communities where, you know, television is inaccessible. And in fact, in the ministry's own document and all previous documents around the DTT, GBC is acknowledged as the station that has the widest coverage and the station that is perhaps the enabler of government's vision of access to all in terms of television content. So one wonders the National Media Commission in terms of their capacity to monitor. And of course, they will tell you that they tried at some point to introduce a law that would have required broadcasters to submit content, program plans for vetting and all of that. If you remember, Gilbert took them to court, and the court indicated that no, what they were trying to do, there are aspects of it that were unconstitutional. And indeed, I did share that view by the court at that time, because we advocated against certain provisions of that LI 2224, which had aspects that bordered on some form of censorship. The other question was, if GBC turns down the directive, won't it affect workers? I guess, did you want to say if GBC were to comply, won't it affect workers? And indeed, I've already said yes. I mean, these are broadcast channels, 24/7 channels. So it's almost like if you say you broadcast on one channel, Pan-African television, you are running a channel, and look at the number of staff that have to run that channel. So certainly, if you are doing 2 channels, there will be additional staff, particularly if you have a focus for certain channels. So if you are having a 24-hour dedicated sports channel, you will certainly be having people who are sports analysts, sports journalists, and so on and so forth. Maybe you need additional cameras to deploy to sporting events and so on and so forth. So certainly, people are going to lose jobs, and the response from GBC to the NMC asking them to intervene, they made it clear that indeed, if they were to give off those 3 channels, the company will collapse. It's not about people who lose jobs. It's about the fact that GBC will collapse. And that is why I think, as I said, we are looking up to the National Media Commission to intervene. Perhaps to wrap up, I just want to touch on this controversial issue about shutdown of radio stations that we've experienced over the past few years. Of course, no one would endorse impunity and illegality. If you are a broadcaster, you are supposed to comply with the authorization conditions. And therefore, if you are not complying, the law must work. However, what is problematic is that if the law is working, it must apply to everyone equally. So if I have not renewed and you have not renewed, if I am being shut down, you must also be shut down. And I think that no one will have any issues with that. But where there is some indication of unfair treatment of some broadcasters and others are being left off the hook and so on and so forth, then it becomes quite problematic. Of course, we do know that Radio Gold, XYZ, we know in terms of political ideology where they belong, the NDC. So to talk about Radio Gold constantly may appear that there is some agenda. But for me, it's about what is the truth. Indeed, as I speak to you now, just this morning, we filed a request for information under the RTI law to the NCA, and we are looking for a number of things. One, including the full list of all radio stations that were shut down under the what they called the spectrum audit or frequency audit, and in line with the Electronic Communications Tribunal decision, so that we are all clear that these stations, these are the company owners, were shut down as a result of that process. We have looked at their database, and it indicates, in some areas when who got the last authorization, and you would see some areas that is blank. We have asked the question, how should we interpret the sections that are blank? Should we take it that those stations have not renewed? And we are told different stories. We have therefore filed to request for information on the list of authorized FM stations across the country as of June 2020, and the date for first authorization and the date of last renewal. We are looking forward to receiving that from the NCA, so that at least if they have any challenges of making the document available in a way that will settle our minds, we can help them publicize whatever data that is available, so that everybody will know that the NCA did not discriminate in the implementation of that decision to shut down a number of radio stations. So certainly, whatever the outcome is, it is not for our consumption. We will make it available to the public. What is important is transparency. They say the spectrum is a public resource, it's a natural resource that, you know, would not be available all the time. If it is exhausted, it's exhausted. And therefore, we need to manage it in a way that will be transparent, that will be beneficial to all of us. And no one is against a government or an entity. All we want is things being done in a way that will benefit Ghanaians, not some Ghanaians, but all Ghanaians. And I think that we'll continue the conversation at some point. I thank you very much.
We've got some very interesting messages, and I like to read them as part of the rounding up of the program. This one is from somebody, a guy called Konja, Konja Solomon, Konja Solomon. And it says, our guest is a fine gentleman. I thought he hated Mahama when Mahama was president. But he has maintained that consistency in criticizing the bad government policies, including those of President Akufo-Addo. Interesting message. I'm going to switch to our WhatsApp messages, and I'll just read a few. This one is from a guy called Bumbara Na Bojoni Husseini. And he says, the ministry is acting in the interest of the ruling government. When power drunkenness becomes the order of the day, this is what you see from greedy politicians. So what happens if the tables of government change? And Bumbera Na Jr. is from Wa, sending us a message from Wa. This message is from Sweden, all the way from Sweden, and it's from somebody called Yusuf Maro. And it says, very, very, very educative program. Thank you so much, Pan-African TV. Much love to you, comrades, and it's from Sweden. This is from Nasser Soa, and Nasser Soa does not indicate where he's sending the message from. He says, it's high time Ghana and the youth stand up and put the Akufo-Addo government right. He will end up selling Ghana. What kind of president is this? This is from Dennis Andaban. And Dennis Andaban writes, a very good program. It is now that I understand Kufuor's admonition to the MPP that power can trick. A government that should represent the welfare and interests of the people is far becoming a threat to the survival of the people. This one is from Honorable Kweku Citizen. Honorable Kweku Citizen says, I'm listening from BJ's hostel, Dechemsu, Kumasi. You are doing a wonderful job. And many more messages, but we don't have time. First and foremost, I'd like to say a very big thank you to our guest. This is his job. He's the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. He's involved in advocacy. He has done a great job about the Right to Information Bill, even though I don't think that that battle is over yet. That battle perhaps needs to continue. And he's been a great advocate for media freedoms in Ghana. We are so grateful to him that he accepted to come all the way to our studio and to contribute to this discussion, not just for our own enlightenment, but also to help people in their homes in 32 African countries throughout Ghana and elsewhere to understand the issues, and we are most grateful to him. We are also exceedingly grateful to the viewers who have allowed us into their homes and who have contributed by sending all kinds of messages. We are most grateful to you. Indeed, Pan-African television has become what it is today because you allow us into your homes on a regular basis, and we are most grateful for that. For those of us at Pan-African television, we'd like to advise you that please keep watching us. Keep watching us because we bring you the best in sports, the best in news, best in current affairs, best in entertainment, best in everything. So please keep watching us. Watch us to make us relevant. Watch us to make us proud. So on behalf of all of us, and today our producer is Darren, our director is Darren, the producers remain Loretta and Roseanne. And for all of us in Pan-African television, we'd like to say goodbye to you until we see you again next week. It's bye-bye from all of us.